79-year-old Stella Liebeck nearly $3 million for burns she suffered from a cup of coffee. Coffee she bought at this McDonald's across the street from the base. It didn't take long for the story to spread across the country and around the world until everyone knew, or thought they knew, the story.
I mean, it seems frivolous. It seems like it should have been common sense that if you spilt hot coffee on yourself, like, that was your own fault.
I think she won her case and won a lot of money.
The summary of that story to me is tying up the court system for a bunch of nonsense.
Hey everyone, welcome to Thought Crime, Keto and Crime, and the Keto Comic. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. Today we're talking about a case that rocked the nation, a case that everyone's heard of. Have you ever heard of the McDonald's hot coffee case? Willing to bet you have. And what did you hear? You probably heard the same thing I heard, that a elderly lady bought some coffee at the drive-thru at a McDonald's, was attempting to put it between her legs and attempted to add hot, cream and sugar while driving because she did not have cup holders in her car, and removed the lid, therefore spilling hot coffee all over herself and then suing McDonald's for the ensuing burns. And as a result of such frivolous cases, we need tort reform. We need to reduce the citizens' rights to sue big corporations or to hold people liable for the products that they produce for us. Is that what you heard? I bet that's what you did hear, because that was the thing. That was the campaign that was launched to basically smear what really happened in this case. Are there a lot of frivolous lawsuits? Yes, but this wasn't one of them. So let's dig into it. What really happened in the McDonald's hot coffee case? First, let's talk about the lady involved in this case. For those of you watching via video, to your right, my left, you see a picture of Miss Stella Liebeck. She was the lady involved in this case, involved in the burns. She was born December 14th, 1912. She died at the age of 91 in 2004 of natural causes. She spent most of her life in Arizona, namely Tucson, where she retired from being a retail worker. In 1991-92, she moved to be near her children in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is where the incident occurred. And up until this incident did occur, it was widely reported by her daughter and people that knew her that she was in great health. She repainted her own ceiling in her Albuquerque home. She was known to move palm trees around her yard back in Tucson, walked every day, could do light yard work, and clean her own house. All of that came to an end due to the burn she received from McDonald's coffee. She was the subject of Stella Liebeck versus McDonald's Restaurants versus McDonald's International. She had to sue both the local franchise association and corporate McDonald's to get any satisfaction after what happened to her. But let's get into what did happen. Just after moving to Albuquerque, she was out one day with her grandson, Cristiano, who was dropping another family member off at the Albuquerque, New Mexico airport to catch an early flight. So Stella rode with her grandson. He was driving his 1989 Ford Probe, which, just as you heard, did not have cup holders. Cup holders really weren't a thing in the 80s or 90s. I don't remember having cup holders that you didn't have to buy separately. Remember those you had to buy separately and hang over the back of a seat or over the door? You know, wedge it in between where the window rolls up on the door. Those are the only ones I remember from a very early time. I don't remember seeing actual cup holders in cars until mid-90s, late 90s, and maybe even 2000. So that's a later invention. It wasn't really a thing. So I don't understand why people are talking about why she didn't have cup holders in her car, because cars didn't really come with them at that time. It was definitely a luxury item, not a standard item. February 27th, 1992, she rode with her grandson to drop another family member off at the airport. Upon leaving the airport, they decided they were hungry because, as I said, it was an early morning flight. They pulled into the McDonald's located at 5001 Gibson Boulevard Southeast in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They went through the drive-thru. They each ordered a combo meal, both of them containing coffee from McDonald's. Now, at the time, McDonald's still served its coffee in the more paper-like styrofoam, the really thin styrofoam cups. You remember them? They had they were white. They had the McDonald's logo running around them, and their lids weren't what you would call drinkable lids. They were the small flat lids that had a little lip thing that you had to open, and it never really works all that well, but that's what they had, and then you had to drink your coffee that way. So they each ordered a combo meal, breakfast meal that had hot coffee. Her grandson, Chris, actually related during the trial that they both said, well, we don't need to be driving with this hot coffee. Let's pull over into the parking lot and get ourselves situated before we drive off. So they pulled from the drive-through window with the hot coffees to a parking space in the parking lot and proceeded to get themselves ready because he was going to be driving and eating. He needed to, get his drink situated, and then allow her to get hers situated so that they could eat and drink while he drove her home. But Stella, while trying to put the cream and sugar in her coffee, put it between, as there was no cup holders and no straight spaces. Everything in this Ford Probe was on a slant, so there was no place for her to actually sit the coffee to do what she needed to do. Everything was at a slant, so she had no choice, as most of us would do, to put it between her knees to steady it while she removed the lid and put her cream and sugar in it. Well, according to her grandson and according to Stella, she removed the lid. When she removed the lid, the coffee spilled. All of the hot coffee, when a little bit of it hit her, of course she flinched, and all of it went over. The entire 12 ounces of hot coffee, searing hot coffee, went over her lap, and her jogging pants absorbed most of the liquid. Chris said she was screaming. She got out of the car, but the damage was done. There was coffee all over, all in the seat. She appeared to be in great pain. So Chris said he jumped out, helped her into the back seat, covered her with a sheet because she was immediately complaining of, even though she was burning down below, she was complaining of being cold. Now, I don't know if you know, but if you suffer severe burns, you become very, very cold because your circulation cuts off to the area as the body responds to the burn. So she became very, very cold. So he covered her with a sheet he had in the back of the car. And he immediately jumped into the car, drove her to one emergency room where the wait was going to be more than an hour. And he said he knew that his 79-year-old grandmother, who was already showing signs of going into shock, couldn't make it. I don't understand what was going on in the ERs in the 80s and early 90s, but anyway. So he immediately put her back into the car and drove to another hospital across Albuquerque where they were able to see her much, much quicker. She was immediately taken to the burn unit where she was treated for third-degree burns over 16% of her body and lesser-degree burns on another percentage of her body. So think about it. Third-degree burns. Third-degree burns are some of the most severe burns you can receive. It's horror film level burns. All from a cup of coffee. What the heck, McDonald's? What the heck? And if you want to see pictures of Stella's injuries, I highly encourage you to Google them. They are out there. I'm not choosing to put them in this video because I don't want to be demonetized, but they are out there. So take a look at those burns. They were not superficial burns that we were led to believe. These were horrible, painful, shock-inducing burns. As I said, third-degree burns over 16% of her body. As a result of these burns, she was physically ill, so she couldn't eat, and she lost, in the time that she was in the hospital and in recovery at home, there was a span of 8 days that she was in the ICU at the hospital. ICU now, for burns from coffee. and 3 weeks of home care. During that time, she lost about 20% of her body weight because she was too sick to eat. They were having to give her vitamins and nutrients via IV because she was that sick from the shock reduced from these burns. And she lost down to under 90 pounds because she wasn't that big to begin with. She was barely 110 pounds to begin with. So she lost about 20% of her body weight over the course of this injury. Her hospital bills and everything came to about $10,000, which in 1992, that's probably equivalent to $50,000 or $60,000 today. Well, Stella had sold her house in Tucson, and she had the proceeds from that sale in the bank, where she was planning just to turn around and pay cash for another house near her daughter in Albuquerque. Now, she was 79 years old, so she was already on Medicare and a Medicare supplement plus Social Security. So she was on a very limited income. And part of being financially sound is having a paid-for house or having a place to live where you're not having to pay rent or mortgage if you can. So she was planning to do that. She was planning to use the proceeds from the sale of her house in Tucson, Arizona, to buy a new one in Albuquerque. And that was what her money was for. So she could not see losing a third of her money towards medical bills, because Medicare, even in a Medicare supplement, are only going to pay about 80-90% of that. So she's going to be left with about $10,000 of uncovered medical bills from her injuries. And she didn't see draining the only savings that she had to go towards that. So she, while at home recovering, because she spent 8 days in ICU and 3 weeks at home with her daughter taking care of her. They didn't have the funds to pay for a nurse, so her daughter took off work for 3 weeks and took care of her at home. As I said, her bills from the hospital and up to that point came to about $10,000. They estimated her continuing care, which would include surgeries and skin grafts, would be about $2,500, and her daughter lost about $5,000 in wages, being with her mother 24/7 for almost a month. So, after speaking with her daughter and son-in-law, Judy and Charles Allen, she determined that perhaps McDonald's liability insurance should be paying for her medical bills. As her daughter Judy said, she maintains insurance on her house. If anybody gets injured in her yard or in her house, her insurance is going to cover that. That's what you pay insurance for. So why isn't McDonald's insurance covering Mom's medical bills?
Yes. She had skin grafts. And when they started talking about skin grafts, that's when she became concerned about her money, because she had moved from Tucson to Albuquerque. She wanted to buy a little house, and she thought all of her money would go because Medicare was only going to pay 80%. And so she would have to pay 20%. And we started thinking, why is McDonald's insurance not paying for the medical? I have insurance on my home. If someone comes in and breaks an arm or hurts themselves, I expect my insurance to pay for it. That's what I'm paying insurance for. So we wrote a letter to McDonald's. Chuck and I wrote a letter to McDonald's asking them to cover her medical and to check the temperature on the coffee, because it seemed not reasonable that someone would have this kind of an injury from a cup of coffee. They came back with an offer of what was at that point $10,000 in medical. They came back with an offer of $800.
They wrote a very well-worded letter to McDonald's, no lawyers involved, asking for assistance with her mother's medical bills, and they spelled it out. $10,000 in current medical bills, estimated $2,500 for the rest, $5,000 lost wages, for about $18,000 in total damages they asked McDonald's to help with, or asked McDonald's to have their insurance help with. McDonald's sent them a letter offering them $800. $800. Let that sink in. With the help of her daughter and son-in-law and now attorney Kenneth Wagner, who was a Texas attorney that got licensed in New Mexico to help with this case, but he had already sued on behalf of another McDonald's burn victim in Houston, Texas, where the woman received third-degree burns, so he had experience with this. He had settled that case for around $27,000. He had fought McDonald's and won before. That actually settled out of court for almost 30 grand. With his help, they continued to ask McDonald's to settle this. They even went as far as arbitration. They asked for $90,000. The money for Stella's medical bills, plus now to pay her legal fees. They asked again for $300K. Still, McDonald's said no. Then finally, an arbitrator, a mediator, in a federally mandated, because of the federal arbitration rules, sometimes when you sue a corporation, you have to go to mediation and arbitration. They even did that, and the arbitrator, a federal arbitrator, suggested McDonald's pay $225,000, both for actual damage and punitive damages. Again, McDonald's turned it down. They said they wanted to go to a trial jury. Why? Because this period was a hotbed of wanting to reform the tort laws. It had started all the way back in the late 70s. President Ronald Reagan championed it through the 80s, and Senior Bush was already had championed it into the early 90s. You were just now having the switch over to the Clinton administration, but the Clinton administration was still very much corporate-centric, so you had a lot of push to reduce a person's power to sue a corporation. So you had a lot of what they call tort reform, which is a fancy word for reduce a person's ability to sue a company, going on at this time. And New Mexico had never awarded on behalf of a plaintiff, had never found in favor of a plaintiff, somebody suing a corporation, in their favor. They had never found in the favor of a plaintiff suing a company or a corporation in the state of New Mexico. So McDonald's figured their chances of winning this were pretty good. So they fought it all the way to jury trial. While in trial, McDonald's brought in a chart. McDonald's legal team brought in a chart outlining over 700 people that had been burned with either second or third degree burns by their hot coffee. You heard me correctly. McDonald's brought that in, not Stella's legal team. Why would McDonald's do that to themselves? Why would they say, hey, our coffee has burned over 700 people, and here's the proof? Because they were trying to fight it on a statistical level. They wanted to show they serve billions and billions. Billions and billions, millions of people a day, billions of people a year. They wanted to show how statistically insignificant the amount of burns caused by their hot coffee were. And that's how they played it. They also said that their coffee was served at 187 degrees Fahrenheit, which was the industry standard for hot coffee, and it still is. You still find people, some coffee houses serving well over 190 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, scientists from the National Burn Institute have said that liquid served at that temperature of 185 degrees up to 200 degrees can cause third-degree burns in 1 second. Think about that. Part of their argument was that Stella caused the burn herself by being in a moving vehicle, which she was not, and for not removing her pants to stop the burns from being so severe. Because remember, the liquid soaked up into her jogging pants. So they were saying that she was partly at fault because she didn't get those pants off in time. Now, experts testified that you have 1 second to get that liquid off your skin. Now, how can you jump out of a car at any age, any state of health, and get your pants off in 1 second by the time before that coffee burns you? You can't. You're fighting a losing battle, and over 700 people had already fought that losing battle. But they wanted to show how statistically insignificant. They thought because New Mexico had always been such a friendly state towards the corporations that this would fly. During the course of the trial, they also tried to point out that because of Stella's age, her burns were probably more severe. They wouldn't have been as severe if she had had a younger person's skin. So McDonald's was not making themselves seemed the family-friendly, all-American company that they market themselves to be, they were just coming off as jerks. And everybody saw through this. Stella's legal team were only seeking actual or compulsory damages. They weren't seeking punitive. During the course of the testimony, Judge Robert H. Scott actually turned to the jury after hearing McDonald's and said, I highly recommend punitive damages in this trial. In this case, I highly recommend you consider punitive damages. They pissed the judge off to the point that he went above the actual or compulsory damages, and he told the jury to consider punitive damages. Because that's what tort reform was all about, is cutting the amount of punitive damages, pain and suffering that could be awarded to a person. So after 7 days of trial, the jury came back with $160,000 actual or compulsory judgment against McDonald's. They basically said that Stella was about 20 to 25% liable for her own injuries, putting the coffee between her knees, trying to take the lid off with one hand, that sort of thing. Something that Stella had already admitted during the course of the trial, that it was very much her fault the way she tried to remove the coffee cup. What they were arguing was that the heat of the McDonald's coffee was way too hot, and it was dangerous. It was just a dangerous substance to have. So they awarded her actually $200,000, but then reduced it by 20 to 25% back to $160,000 to compensate for what they found to be her fault. But then the kicker was, they really thought that McDonald's should have to remedy all these cases, like all these 700 cases that they had tried or settled for hot coffee burns. They had settled for a total of $500,000. So after looking at that, they realized that that wasn't enough. They needed to punish McDonald's for being jerks about this. And they awarded the equivalent of 2 days of gross coffee revenue, $2.7 million. That's what they estimated McDonald's brought in 2 days, selling at that time 49-cent cups of coffee. $2.7 million in punitive damages. The judge did say that he was exercising his right to reduce those punitive damages to 3 times compulsory or 3 times actual damages, which he did. He reduced the punitive damages to $480,000, and then $160,000 for actual damages was a $640,000 settlement that he ordered in this case. He then looked at McDonald's legal team and said, I have some words for you. He said, in all the days I've been on the bench, I've never seen such shenanigans in my life. You thought you saw the light at the end of the tunnel. You thought this case was going to end your legal woes with coffee. And that's what they were doing. They thought that if they would make an example of this elderly woman, and that would stop anybody from coming forward about hot coffee ever again. He said, you thought you saw a light at the end of the tunnel, but that light was attached to a moving train. You're paying $640,000. More than they had paid out on all those other 700 cases total. Well, of course, McDonald's appealed, and Miss Liebeck's, Stella's legal team appealed, and finally, in an out-of-court settlement, they undisclosed, they settled for what her family has revealed to be around that. So most likely settled for under $600,000 is what McDonald's paid for the trauma this woman suffered. All right. So what was the aftermath of this case? Tort reform. The tort reform people grabbed hold of this case like never. You saw all kinds of public service announcements about frivolous law cases or frivolous lawsuits, and this is the case they used. A woman made $2 million, almost $3 million from getting burned by coffee. That's what we heard. That's what the American public heard. That's what I heard. That's what I thought until I had enough sense to dig into this case and see what actually happened. This case and a few others have been used as a banner for doing away with punitive damages and limiting your ability to even collect actual damages from corporations for product liability. So that's happened. It's been everywhere in pop culture. Every comedian, every late night talk show had something to say about this case during the 90s. I remember it very vividly. You had it making it into sitcoms like Seinfeld, things like that, where they really took this as a frivolous case and a way to make some quick money, quote unquote. And you even had Toby Keith, country singer Toby Keith, put a line in one of his songs talking about spill a cup of coffee, make $1 million. This has made it into so much pop culture, but it's the wrong story. What I just told you was what actually happened. She did not become a millionaire off this case. She got enough to recompense their legal fees, pay her medical bills, and be able to live out her retirement. She died at the age of 91 in 2004 and was never the same. She was always physically weaker after this. They stole a huge chunk of her golden years. So I think they got out very light for that. What have been some of the other aftermaths to come out of this? New coffee service studies have been done to see if McDonald's was out of the ordinary, and they weren't. In fact, there were 3 other fast food places, Chick-fil-A, Burger King, and Starbucks, that all served coffee hotter than McDonald's. So what they realized is that that was the industry standard. That made a batch of coffee last a lot longer when it was at that temperature, and that customers wanted it hot. So it was an industry standard. And so as a result, most people have not lowered the temperature at which they serve coffee. That has not happened. But what we have seen is new advancements in how hot coffee and hot liquids are served. You see the new triple insulated cups, like the ones I've got pictured here. You have the new lids that basically are a lot safer. They don't melt as easy. Instead of having to wrestle with that little, listen to my southern accent, having to struggle with that little lip that you have to lift up, they had the new ones with the drinking hole cut right into it, elevated so that the coffee can't come spilling out if the cup gets jostled. You also have restaurant chains like Starbucks, McDonald's, and others that will actually dress your coffee for you instead of just giving you the cream and sugar to do it yourself, or the cream and sweetener. They will do it for you. They have those automated dispenser machines where they can put 3 creams, 2 sugar, and give it to you. So notice the new ways in which coffee is served. It's all a result of this case. So that's it, folks. The McDonald's hot coffee case. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll be back real soon. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Keto Comic. Out.